Can you hear me, Dr. Graves?
Yes, I can.
Yes, wonderful. You and David Crowe are both right now on, not air live, but being recorded here at the CKLN studios in Toronto. So thank you so much, Dr. Graves and Mr. Crowe.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
Great. Dr. Graves, we're just discussing terms here. This doesn't have to be in the actual final product, but just so both of you have a record of the whole thing. This is what's happening. Are you okay with this?
And what is this?
Oh, we're just talking right now. We're just talking about the terms of the debate. I suggested that.
I don't even really see it much as much of a debate. That we're presenting government documents, and Mr. Crowe's are presenting opinions. I mean, this is crazy. I mean, if the government documents have to be dismissed because Mr. Crowe says so, then we have nothing. So I just don't understand.
I was planning to talk about scientific papers. I hope.
Well, yes, and you're not a scientist, isn't that correct?
Well, I think Dr. Graves.
No, but I mean, let's get to it. Here we are. Well, neither of us are scientists, and we're talking about scientific papers.
Dr. Graves, if I may interject periodically in my role as the host, and we haven't formally started yet, but I'll say this: both of you have evidence that you individually find as credible, and both of you have conducted yourselves as experts in this field, regardless of what you think of each other. Both of you have done radio interviews. Both of you have published papers of your own. And so I think, really, if you don't want to call this a debate, you can call this a discussion where you both present your evidence side by side. And,
I don't know what evidence is being presented. How can you deny a federal virus surveillance program? We have every progress report, we have every experiment, and every contract. What evidence is being presented to the contrary? That the program didn't exist? I mean, I just don't understand.
This
is all a menagerie of nonsense.
Dr. Graves, and I appreciate that, and I think that type of spirit will make for a very interesting conversation. Just to start off, let me ask you a question. I'm going to make sure that I reference any websites or information you want me to reference during this debate. So,
the same would be true for Mr. Crowe.
That
all he has is Dr. Peter Duesberg, one of the AIDS developers. This is nonsense.
Well,
this is absolutely nonsense.
And quite possibly so, Dr. Graves, quite possibly so. But let me just get this straight, just so I make sure that if people want to find more about your work, I can say, Dr. Boyd Graves, at what website would you like me to reference?
Well, my website.
Yes,
you
sir.
have that? Have you been there?
I have, yes, but can you give me the title?
BoydGraves.com. I mean, my goodness. We have 30 scientists and medical doctors that have posted their reviews of my work. I don't know what Mr. Crowe has.
No problem.
Other than Dr. Duesberg.
No problem. And
I don't know.
And Mr. David Crowe, what website would you like me to reference of yours?
aras.ab.ca and rethinkingaids.com.
Well, it'll be one or the other, Mr. Crowe. Which one would you prefer?
Well, let's go with rethinkingaids.com.
Rethinkingaids.com. Wonderful. Are both of you gentlemen ready to begin?
I'm ready.
Okay, Mr. Graves.
If there's something to begin. I mean, I'm confused. I'm confused here. I don't know Mr. Crowe other than what I've seen him say in favor of Dr. Duesberg, and I'm concerned.
That's okay, Dr. Graves. I offered you in the email exchange to you and others the opportunity to make a 5-minute opening statement about either yourself or the information you're presenting, your case, basically. And then I offered Mr. Crowe a chance. So you have the choice of either making a 5-minute opening statement or letting Mr. Crowe go first for 5 minutes. The times will be loose, but I will keep the times honest. So would you like to, don't start yet, would you like to make the first opening statement, or would you like Mr. Crowe
let Mr. Crowe put up on the table anything that he thinks that he has.
Okay.
Right now, in the face of government documents, this is absolutely ridiculous, but go ahead.
Absolutely. Okay. Gentlemen, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start the debate formally by just you'll hear it in a second. So here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, here we are on April 1st, 2008 at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. I have the absolute privilege of hosting Dr. Boyd Graves at boydgraves.com, BoydGraves.com, and Mr. David Crowe at rethinkingaids.com for the great AIDS debate. Mr. David Crowe, since Dr. Boyd Graves has elected to let you serve first, please deliver a 5-minute opening statement on your position on AIDS.
Well, I guess I'd like to start by trying to define what AIDS is, and I think that will help illustrate the problem. in Canada, where I am and BK is, and I know Dr. Graves is in the U.S., in Canada the definition of AIDS is about 30 different diseases, mostly infections, but some cancers, which are found usually in conjunction with a positive HIV test, although some diseases can be diagnosed as AIDS without a positive HIV test. So tuberculosis with a positive HIV test in Canada is AIDS, and tuberculosis with a negative test is tuberculosis. In the United States, since 1993, the definition has been considerably different. It's, on paper, almost the same. It's the same 30 different diseases, infections, and cancers, but with one significant difference. And that is, in the United States, if you have a CD4 immune cell count under 200 and a positive HIV test, you are diagnosed as AIDS without any disease at all. And it's only in the United States that this definition holds. It's only one small difference, but by 1997, almost two-thirds of new diagnoses of AIDS were in people diagnosed according to a low immune cell count and a positive HIV test with no AIDS-defining diseases. Why am I quoting statistics from 1997? Well, because the CDC stopped producing statistics after 1997. By now, the percentage of new cases in this category could be much higher than two-thirds. What about Africa and the Third World? Well, here a completely different definition rules. It's called the Bangui definition, which was developed by the World Health Organization and the Centers for Disease Control in 1986 in the Central African city of Bangui, hence its name. And if you have three of the following four symptoms without an HIV test, you have AIDS. Persistent cough, persistent fever, persistent diarrhea, weight loss greater than 10% of your original body weight. In other words, malnutrition in Africa has been redefined as AIDS. No need for an HIV test. And when they do studies to see how valid this definition of AIDS is, they don't find a high correlation between the definition and positive HIV tests. So talking about AIDS, you have to realize that depending on the country you're in, it's something completely different. HIV, you might think, is a little bit different, because after all, everybody knows that HIV stands for the human immunodeficiency virus. The problem is that we can't detect HIV directly. We can only detect it supposedly through various tests, and the commonest test used on people is the antibody test. The problem is that antibody tests are not necessarily all that accurate, because an antibody is just a reaction between two proteins in a test tube. The virus is not proven to be present by an antibody test. The way to prove that antibody tests are accurate is by purifying the virus in question, HIV, and showing that people from which the virus can be purified test antibody positive, and people from which it can't be purified test negative. The problem with this, and this is one of the most amazing facts of this whole area, is that HIV has never been purified, so no tests have been validated. That includes the antibody tests and the runners-up in terms of popularity, which are the viral load tests, which are based on looking for a tiny fraction of what is agreed by consensus to be the HIV genome. They don't look for the whole genome, and they can't distinguish between a piece of RNA or DNA, a piece of RNA that is actually within a viral particle, and a piece of RNA that's floating around loose. You
have 1 minute, Mr. Crowe.
Yes. Other problems. A lot of people say that AIDS is a devastating disease. I personally know people who have been well over a decade HIV positive without AIDS drugs, without any disease. They even have a term, this is the establishment, called long-term non-progressors, people who don't take drugs, don't get sick after usually more than a decade. Another problem is that it doesn't behave like a sexual epidemic. In Africa, in some studies, significantly more women, in one study about 24% of black women were HIV positive and about 6% of black men. Yet men are more promiscuous. If it was a sexually transmitted epidemic, there would be more men than women who were positive, and prostitutes would be a risk group, which they're not.
Thank you, Mr. Crowe.
I'd like to turn it over.
Dr. Graves, you have 5 minutes to make your opening statement, please.
Yes. Again, I don't even know why we're debating. Mr. Crowe is looking at the peanut instead of the 2-ton elephant. The fact of the matter is the United States has had a federal virus development program from 1962 to 1978 that preceded HIV and AIDS. It is the position of my followers that this federal virus program needs to be reviewed. Instead of going to the secondary alleged evidence, which Mr. Crowe allegedly thinks he's presenting, the fact of the matter is he has passed by the fact that there are 15 progress reports. Some are some 400 pages apiece, detailing every experiment and every contract of the U.S. Special Virus Program. Our position is that this federal virus program needs to be reviewed. Our secondary position is that the U.S. patented cure for AIDS needs immediate clinical trials. And that further goes to expose our position that if indeed HIV is synthetic, and it is, then so is the cure. The cure is patented as patent number 5676977. All that Mr. Crowe presents is a venue of Dr. Peter Duesberg, who says that HIV does not cause HIV and AIDS, when in fact Dr. Peter Duesberg was one of the scientists and medical doctors that indeed helped develop HIV and AIDS, and we have Dr. Duesberg's experiments within the U.S. Special Virus Program. Indeed, Mr. Crowe is suffering from the delusion of Dr. Peter Duesberg, who indeed was an HIV/AIDS developer, who has built this platform that HIV does not cause AIDS solely because the United States causes HIV and AIDS, and Dr. Duesberg was a part of that process. Until Dr. Duesberg comes clean with respect to his work inside the U.S. Special Virus Program, Mr. Crowe, David, doesn't have a leg to stand on. The fact of the matter is that from 1962 to 1978, the U.S. persisted by spending $550 million to make a special virus, a contagious virus, that selectively kills. And that's what we have with HIV and AIDS. All of the U.S. documents express this point. I don't think Mr. Crowe has addressed any of the documents of the United States. In particular, Mr. Crowe has not addressed the work of Dr. Peter Duesberg inside the U.S. Special Virus Program. How can you follow a person who is one of the AIDS developers and you put that fact aside so that you have a position? Mr. Crowe, you have no position whatsoever. Dr. Peter Duesberg was one of the developers of HIV and AIDS, and we can prove that. That should be added into your equation. But for some reason, it is not. As if there has not been 100 years of development of a contagious cancer that selectively kills. Our timeline, boydgraves.com/timeline, is a matter of fact. It has not been refuted in the last 5 or 6 years that the timeline has been available. We have found the wellspring of the genesis of the AIDS pandemic. And there is a pandemic, Mr. Crowe, whether you accept that or not. There is a pandemic. And that origin is our nation state. It is the United States of America. You know, it even goes even further, that here we have 15 progress reports of a federal virus development program seeking to develop a special virus for which no natural immunity could have been acquired. We're asking for a review of the government documents. We're not sure what Mr. Crowe and Dr. Duesberg are asking for. Primarily, Dr. Duesberg would have to be asking that we ignore his work inside the U.S. Special Virus Program to develop HIV. Apparently, that's something that Mr. Crowe has bought into.
1
and
minute,
others.
Dr. Graves, 1 minute.
Yeah, but indeed, all we're saying here to Mr. Crowe and to others, review the U.S. Special Virus Program, and then let the chips fall where they may, instead of casting these aspersions that somehow people didn't start dying en masse in the late 1970s as they did, because they did, both not only in Africa, but in Manhattan as well. An earthquake with 2 epicenters. There is no explanation from Mr. Crowe or Mr. Duesberg other than the fact that Mr. Duesberg was a part of the federal program to make HIV and AIDS. I don't understand Mr. Crowe's position whatsoever.
That's fine, Dr. Graves, and I want to thank you so much for your opening statement. Mr. Crowe as well, your opening statement. Now for the next part of the debate, we'd like to flesh out these ideas in more detail. Please take about 3 minutes each to respond. Mr. Crowe, your response to what Dr. Graves said, and then Dr. Graves, feel free to respond as well.
Well, it's going to be difficult in 3 minutes to respond to everything, but let me respond to the accusation that I'm a follower of Dr. Peter Duesberg. I certainly am a great admirer of Dr. Peter Duesberg. In 1987, he published a paper claiming that HIV was not pathogenic in the journal Cancer Research, and his career at that point was destroyed. His opportunities to have research funding and publications were totally and utterly destroyed. So that shows a lot of conviction in his ideas. But Duesberg is not alone. I'm not a follower of Duesberg. Dr. Duesberg believes that HIV exists. I don't. That's a huge difference between our points of views. There is a list that I maintain on the Rethinking AIDS website of 2,587 doubters, many of which are PhDs, MDs. There's a large number of educated and accomplished people who are questioning this dogma of HIV causing AIDS. I'm not arguing that there was a government program. I'm just saying that they didn't produce a virus, that HIV does not exist, and that AIDS is just a conglomeration of things that are put together on the basis of a flawed antibody test.
Fair enough. And Dr. Graves, your response to that?
Well, Mr. Crowe, we have all seen people dying in the late 1970s, all of a sudden. Not only Africans, but homosexuals. There was I'm sorry, are you still there?
I'm listening. Yes.
No, there was a beep on my phone here. I didn't know if that was from you all.
No problem, Dr. Graves.
There was an earthquake. There was an earthquake that had two epicenters. That does not happen. Africa and Manhattan at the same time. Then you see that the United States recruited 1,086 promiscuous white homosexuals to take an experimental hepatitis B vaccine. This is all by design. It parlays to the 1971 flowchart, the blueprint of the federal program. Mr. Crowe, there was a federal program that preceded HIV and AIDS. Dr. Peter Duesberg was a part of that program. It is Dr. Peter Duesberg's interest that you be confused by what has occurred here. But the epidemiology, the intelligence of the epidemiology shows that there was mass infection in the late 1970s, not only here in the United States, but in Africa, of something. Here we have the progress reports, every experiment and every contract of the federal program that preceded HIV and AIDS. And Mr. Crowe would dare come on this debate and say that the federal program to make HIV is not important, that only his opinion. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. Why don't we review the federal program that made HIV and AIDS, Mr. Crowe, and then assess our comments thereafter? But instead, you are on the front edge of saying that, no, this is not true, and you are wrong, sir. We have government documents, and Dr. Boyd Ed Graves can read.
Thank you so much, Dr. Graves. Mr. Crowe, I'd like you to discuss some of the evidence you have. It appears it's being called into question, and it appears that you called Dr. Graves' evidence into question. So, Mr. Crowe, what evidence do you use to support your theories?
Let me cite from a paper that Dr. Graves recommended to me. It's Sequence Homology and Morphological Similarity of HTLV3, which is now known as HIV, and Visnavirus, a pathogenic lentivirus. In this paper, which is from the journal Science, I believe, Science, volume 227, shows pictures of what are claimed to be HTLV3 next to a sheep virus, Visnavirus, and these pictures are almost identical. So that leads people like Dr. Graves naturally to say, well, these viruses are related, and maybe the U.S. government was doing experiments with the sheep Visnavirus, turned it into HIV, and created this artificial epidemic. But there's one flaw. There's one assumption that Dr. Graves is making, and that is that these pictures are of a virus. How do you tell that pictures in an electron microscope are of a virus when all that's shown is one or two particles taken from a cell culture, not from purified virus. The only
I'd
way
like to
that
answer that. I'd like to answer that because, what you're saying is that somehow Dr. Graves is wrong when he has read and viewed his government documents. These are our government documents, sir. We have the proceedings of the United States of America from the National Academy of Sciences that says that dissident is the etiological agent of HIV and AIDS. Perhaps you may need to read that science paper because it's from the proceedings of the United States of America. It is not from Dr. Graves. So therefore, you cannot beat down the messenger, my friend, because we are reading and using U.S. documents to support our condition, that indeed there was a federal virus program that preceded HIV and AIDS. We want that program reviewed. I'm not even sure what Mr. Crowe's position is because he would say don't review the program because there's nothing here. There's nothing at all. But we have 15 progress reports detailing every experiment and every contract of the U.S. Special Virus Program. We want that program reviewed irrespective of what you may have to say.
Well, that sounds good, gentlemen. I'm going to let you guys continue to go back and forth with each other because you are dealing with each other's specifics. Please do respect each other enough to let each other finish your thoughts and your comments. You'll have plenty of time here. We're at about 20 minutes into this debate.
Yeah, I would just like to address...
Whose turn is it?
It's Mr. Crowe's right now.
Yeah,
okay, and it's in rebuttal or what?
Yes, you basically interrupted Mr. Crowe as he was reviewing a paper. That was fine, Dr. Graves. I'm just going to let Mr. Crowe respond. Please let him make his point, and then please feel free to jump in and make yours after Mr. Crowe makes his. Respect
Certainly.
the fact that we're trying to keep this in a tight time so as many people as possible are interested in the kinetic energy on display here of two very, very diametrically opposed positions. Mr. Crowe, your thoughts?
Well, it's very obvious that virology has been a very corrupted field for many years. There's a 1937 paper by a virologist named Thomas Rivers that's still cited today. And what it says is very interesting because Rivers is supposed to be one of the founders of virology. It says, it is obvious that Koch's postulates have not been satisfied in viral diseases. And Koch's postulates are the fundamental way of proving that a particular pathogen causes a particular disease. Moreover, it is equally evident that proof of the etiological or causative significance of virus has been obtained without their satisfaction. And then he says the rules that we should be using are only two. One, a specific virus must be found associated with a disease with
Mr. Crowe, Dr. Graves appears to have dropped. I'm going to try and contact him. Please finish your point. I'm going to try and get him back before you do. I'm just letting the debate audience know that he somehow dropped. I'm trying to reach him again.
Okay. Well, I'll continue.
Yes.
I'll continue with my quote. The conditions that should be used to determine if a virus is causative are: A, that a specific virus must be found associated with a disease with a degree of regularity, and B, the virus must be shown to occur in the sick individual not as an incidental or accidental finding,
Welcome to Verizon Wireless.
but as the cause of the disease under investigation. BK.
Please continue, Mr. Crowe.
Okay.
I'm just pointing out the efforts to try and reach Mr. Graves, but please continue no matter what you hear.
Okay.
Regardless of interruptions.
It's kind of a little difficult, but I'll keep going. So the first one says a specific virus must be found associated with a disease with a degree of regularity. Well, what's the degree of regularity? That's very different from finding that the virus is always found associated with a disease. So this condition basically allows viruses to be called the cause of a disease when they're not even found all the time with the disease, and it also allows the disease to occur without any evidence of the virus. The second thing is that the association between the virus and the sick individual must be as the cause of the disease under investigation. And this is circular logic because these two conditions are supposed to be saying, how do we determine if a virus is causative? And the second one is saying that we know that it's causative because it's associated as the cause of the disease. So since 1937, probably a lot earlier, virology has used substandard approaches to determine...
What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue to try Dr. Graves. Give me 1 second here. Let's make sure we get this recorded. I'm going to try contacting Dr. Graves' cell phone again now.
Yeah, I suspect that he's He's
Well,
backed
I'm
off.
surprised it's off. I actually called him twice. I called him once before the debate to make sure everything was a go, and he said fine. He was driving home, and then of course we started. So I'm just going to try this number again, 619 number in California that he lists.
The wireless customer you called is not available at this time. Please try your...
Oh, the friendly lady from Verizon.
Yeah, no, it's tragic. Let me continue trying one more time, and I apologize, Mr. Crowe. We will continue to let you make your point, but it's
please don't apologize. This is perhaps good theater, if not anything else.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I'm also going to. I can't leave a message either for some reason. Well, I'm going to try and leave a message right here as I get through with the Verizon Wireless. I'll give him a number to contact me back.
Wireless customer you called is not available at this time. Please try your call again later. Announcement 1, switch 4-8.
Okay, it doesn't appear I can leave a message. I'll tell you what, Mr. Crowe, just so the debate continues moving, and I'm not sure if you remember where you left off, please continue your point. I'm going to email Dr. Graves right now with a number where he can call me back immediately to get back into the debate. So please continue your point that you were making on the history of virology in general.
Yeah, well, maybe I can go back from 1937 to 1890. This 1937 paper by Thomas Rivers quotes Robert Koch, the famous German bacteriologist, speaking at a medical congress in Berlin in 1890. And this is what's called Koch's postulates. If it can be proved, first, that the parasite occurs in every case of the disease in question, and under circumstances which can account for the pathological changes and clinical course of the disease. Secondly, that it occurs in no other disease as a fortuitous and non-pathogenic parasite. And thirdly, that after being fully isolated from the body and repeatedly grown in pure culture, can induce the disease anew. Then the occurrence of the parasite and the disease can no longer be accidental, but in this case, no other relationship between it and the disease except that the parasite is the cause of the disease can be considered. So that's Koch's postulates established in 1890. These are not scientific rules. These are logical rules. Basically, it says that if a virus or other pathogen causes a disease, you must be able to purify it from cases of the disease. And also, you must be able to cause the disease again by injecting pure virus or pure bacteria or whatever the pathogen is into into an uninfected animal to produce the infection, to produce the disease in question.
I just sent Dr. Graves the number here at CKLN Studios in Toronto. I'm going to send him another email. Please continue.
Yeah. So what Dr. Rivers did in 1937 with the full consent of the field of virology was he dismantled Koch's postulates and said, you might want Koch's postulates for bacteria, and you might not accept that a bacteria is causative unless they're satisfied, but for a virus, we're going to have different conditions. Effectively, what the standards for virology are, if a big, important, powerful virologist says that a particular virus is causative, and he can get support of his colleagues, then it's causative. And if anybody questions it who's not a virologist, well, that doesn't count, because only virologists are allowed to comment on virology. So the standards being very low, you find papers like the one I referred to with the Visna virus, where it's very clear if you read the paper closely that no virus was ever purified. And that goes for most articles on virology, particularly on HIV, but it also applies to SARS, West Nile virus, and to several others. I can't say it applies to all of them because there's just so many viruses to review and so little time in my life. I'd also like to address Dr. Graves' claim that there was a pandemic. Well, pandemic implies massive deaths, and clearly in places like Africa, there are massive numbers of people dying. But there are many reasons for that. There's malnutrition, which is caused in some cases by neoliberal economic policies, by the removal of people from their subsistence agriculture into cities where they're malnourished if they don't have a good job, which most of them don't. There are amongst some segments, and
Sorry, David, I'm just interrupting this to put this back on air.
Please try your call again later. Announcement 1, switch 4-8.
And that is the message I'm getting from Dr. Graves' machine. I sent him a couple of emails.
You have just made
a couple of emails as well. Please continue.
Yeah. So there are many reasons for deaths in Africa, but the other fact of Africa is that the populations have continued to grow quite dramatically, and that doesn't indicate that there is this pandemic that is racing through the population, killing millions of people. The other problem, I think, is that the Bangui definition of AIDS basically redefines malnutrition as AIDS. And so if you start looking for what's called AIDS, you start finding a lot of it, but the doctors who are doing this don't even consider the fact that this might be malnutrition. Although recently they've discovered that you can't give people AIDS drugs unless you also feed them. And so a lot of the reports of people getting better with AIDS drugs in Africa may just be a symptom of the fact that they're getting fed better, or that people are realizing that the drugs are making them sick, but they're also extremely valuable on the black market. So if you give people something that's very valuable and they sell it and buy more food, they will also get better. One of the insidious things about AIDS is the toxicity of the drugs that are used to supposedly combat this mythical virus. One of the biggest side effects of AIDS drugs is anemia. And in Africa, anemia is a serious problem. It's a problem because of malaria, which causes a loss of blood. It's a problem because of parasitic infections like hookworm infections, which also cause a loss of blood. So many Africans are anemic. They're now being persuaded to take drugs like the feared nucleoside analogs, and those drugs cause serious anemia. Erythropoietin, which is a blood stimulating compound that's one of the most profitable drugs in the world, is mainly used for cancer and AIDS patients. In fact, it's advertised specifically for people using a specific AIDS drug known as AZT. But in Africa, this drug and regular transfusions are not available. So people who end up with serious anemia because their body cannot produce blood anymore will simply die. And of course, because they've been HIV positive and diagnosed with AIDS and put on AIDS drugs, the death will be listed as an AIDS death, which causes more well-meaning people in North America to send more money to buy more drugs for more Africans to kill more Africans. Possibly the worst aspect of this is the drug AZT, the first AIDS drug ever produced, ever approved for use in the United States or anywhere. It's now rarely used by itself, with the one major exception of pregnant women. AZT is scientifically a very interesting drug because it's called a nucleoside analog. What that means is that it replaces one of the four beads of DNA, the ACGT, adenosine, cytosine, guanine, thymidine. Those four beads that make up a DNA chain can be interrupted by one molecule of AZT. The T in AZT stands for thymidine, indicating that it replaces the thymidine molecule in the DNA chain. The difference is that AZT is defective. So one molecule of AZT stops a DNA chain growing. Now imagine if you were to give a drug like this to a pregnant woman with a growing fetus in her womb. What is that going to do to the fetus? It's randomly going to stop cells from dividing in the fetus, which is going to cause birth defects, potentially cancers, and all kinds of abnormalities. And in fact, that is found, although usually those are called the side effects of HIV.
Unbelievable. Mr. Crowe, give me 1 second here. I'm going to record one more phone call. I've sent Dr. Boyd Graves 3 emails in a row with the 416-979 subject, a number here at the studio, an extension in them for him to call me back, and asked if he could call me back or email me back with another number to reach him at, or perhaps if he needs to reschedule to let us know so we don't just continue without him. I've offered him time to make up just in case he wants, because obviously you've had 10 or so minutes, although interrupted, to continue. So here I am calling Dr. Boyd Graves again at the number that worked earlier in the debate. It's a 619 number in California. And I'm putting this on the air here.
Welcome to Verizon Wireless. The wireless customer you called is not available at this time. Please try your call again later. Announcement 1, switch 4-8.
Okay, so those are the results of my trying to contact Dr. Boyd Graves back. It's a shame. He certainly seemed to be fired up for this debate, and you are as well. And
yeah,
it seemed like you guys were going at each other pretty good.
Well, I guess I'd like to comment on his claim that there was this U.S. national virus development program.
Why don't you do that just so listeners out there to this debate know, Mr. Crowe, I'm going to ask you to spend, it's about 36 minutes in, and it's been an interrupted debate, obviously, but the next 10 or so minutes, 10, 15 minutes maybe max, to deal with Dr. Graves' claims and to outline your own, or maybe take us to an hour, which is about 24 minutes. And we'll just make this a full-fledged discussion of what you believe Dr. Graves' claims are, since he isn't here to make them himself, although he's certainly welcome to call us back in or reschedule if you're okay with it. Would you be okay if we could do this again?
Yeah. I'm rather suspecting he doesn't want to continue the debate, but certainly if he wants to come back, I'm happy to start again at the beginning with no hard feelings. It's possible he just had a problem with his phone or something. So
it's entirely possible that something's happened. I can't reach him by phone. I have sent him 3 emails. You are CC'd on those emails as well. So there is some time stamping involved. But regardless, Mr. Crowe, what do you think Dr. Graves' position, or what do you think of Dr. Graves' position with respect to official documents he uses as evidence of a bioweapons program?
Well, he's a little secretive about these documents. He makes pretty broad claims about them, and I have seen the flowchart. I paid $5 or $10 to download it from his website. And I'm perfectly prepared to believe that it is a legitimate U.S. government document. I'm perfectly prepared to believe that the U.S. government was investigating the creation of viruses. Germ warfare research occurred probably for many years after countries disavowed it. Pardon me?
Sorry.
Try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.
At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options. To leave a callback number, press 5.
Hi, Dr. Graves. This is BK at CKLN Radio in Toronto. Mr. Crowe and I are still here. He's currently discussing what he believes is your position or the worth of your documents and evidence. Please do give us a call back at 416-979-5251, extension 2376. It is in your email. And please do give us a call back when you get a chance to either let us know what the status is of your ability to debate this evening. If you'd like to continue, we're both here waiting for you. Thanks so much. And sorry about that, Mr. Crowe. I'm going to continue trying Dr. Graves' phone. The answering machine's obviously working now. Please do continue with your discussion of the flowchart from Dr. Graves' website.
Yeah, and I've got the flowchart in front of me right now, and like I was saying, I have no trouble believing that the U.S. government, like the Russians and probably the Chinese and the British and the French and all other powerful governments with big weapons development systems, would try to develop viruses, and whether it was actually for the creation of disease as a germ warfare weapon or maybe some warped medical research program, I don't really know. The question really is, did they manage to develop a virus? Now, if HIV is claimed to be that virus, as it is by Dr. Graves, then there has to be some evidence that HIV exists. The fact that HIV has never been purified is a bit of a problem. The fact that it's detected by antibody tests is a bit of a problem. The fact that in North America it's in majority restricted to gay men, yet in Africa it's mostly heterosexual women, is a little bit of a problem. The fact that it's claimed to be a fatal virus, and yet there are an increasing number of people living decades without any drugs to supposedly stop the ravages of this deadly virus, is also a problem. We in the public are given basically a mythical story about HIV, about everybody who gets it dies. It's a problem for everybody. And most of what we're told is simply not true. But the scientific establishment is so wedded to this story that they have to continue telling it. Otherwise, the public wouldn't support research into it. It's probably the most overfunded disease program in the world. And nothing that they've done has been successful. Every attempt to produce a vaccine has failed. There was one just recently. The drugs are acknowledged to be toxic, although not so much publicly. But if you read the scientific papers, as I do, I've read thousands of them, you see all kinds of stories about serious adverse effects, including things like fatal liver failure that have occurred shortly after starting AIDS drugs. When people have a needle stick injury, for example, they're pushed very hard into taking these drugs, and they're healthcare workers. They believe in this stuff, and even so, about half of them cannot take these drugs for even a few weeks. And one drug in particular, nevirapine, which is almost as bad as AZT, perhaps worse, had to be stopped amongst healthcare workers who'd experienced a needle stick injury because it was causing fatal liver failure. These drugs are so incredibly toxic, it's really horrible. Dr. Graves has a little bit of, perhaps a lot, of a financial conflict of interest. He has patented something called tetrasilver, which is patented by the U.S. government as the cure for AIDS. It's amazing what you can get patented these days.
Unbelievable. And Mr. Crowe, just in fairness to Dr. Graves, we are about 42 minutes into this debate, such as it is. I'm going to give him another call right now. I'll do it on this recording live right here with you. And because before you get into his patents at each stage, I would like to see if we can reach him so that he can make the first claims about it.
This is Boyd Ed Graves. If you could please leave a message, and I will certainly try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much.
At the tone, please record your message. When you have finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options. To leave a callback number, press 5.
Hi, Dr. Graves. This is BK at CKLN Radio in Toronto. I am here with Mr. David Crowe. He is about to discuss Tetrasil, your patented cure for AIDS. I certainly would invite you to respond to the email to let me know what happened with respect to your phone, and would invite you to call me back here in Toronto at 416-979-5251, extension 2376, to let me know what happened, whether or not you'd like to reschedule. Mr. Crowe, you would agree to do this again?
Certainly. Yeah, I'd be happy to do it once more. I'm not sure if the same thing happened a second time that I'd want to do it a third time.
Well, no, I think I'm in the same boat with you, but I certainly would like to give Dr. Graves a chance just in case something serious did occur and he needed to attend to it. That's always understandable. But anyway, so we'll end this message on Dr. Graves' voicemail. Thanks so much, Dr. Graves. Please do either email me at blackkrishna@gmail.com or call me back at the number again, 416-979-5251, extension 2376. It would be much appreciated. So that was another message left on Dr. Graves' answering machine. I apologize, Mr. Crowe, for all the interruptions. But right now, at about 44 minutes, do you have enough time to go into Tetrasil and to finish off your thoughts on AIDS?
Tetrasilver, actually.
Tetrasilver?
I mean, I only know a limited amount of information about it, but what I know about it concerns me. That first of all, Dr. Graves is promoting fear of HIV and AIDS just like the mainstream. He's saying that HIV causes a fatal illness caused AIDS. Now, one problem I have for anything that claims to be a cure for AIDS is I described how there's 3 drastically different definitions of AIDS. And that AIDS itself in North America is largely 30 different infections and cancers. Now, how can one drug cure all those different things? That kind of boggles the mind. The fact that Dr. Graves is exploiting fear, particularly in the black community, in order to get people on a drug that he presumably has some business relationship with. I don't know what it is. He's very coy about that. He's doubly exploiting the fear of the black community because, first of all, American blacks are very suspicious of the U.S. government, and given the history in the United States, that's not terribly surprising. Secondly, he's building up fear of HIV and AIDS, which is also promoted amongst the black community by the medical establishment. So those two things together presumably are driving quite a few people to try his supposed cure.
And there's been things like the Tuskegee experiments and others that have targeted black Americans in the past that were, in fact, run by the federal government.
Yes, I mean the suspicion of the government is. I mean, I think most people nowadays in the United States are suspicious of the motivations of the current U.S. administration. But there's been a lot of prejudice against blacks for many years. When they get attention from the medical system, there's a certain amount of suspicion. I think there's a real element of racism here. In Africa, for example, the message that seems to be given by even the most liberal and politically correct people is that the black men are the problem. And so this idea of the insatiable black sexual predator has somehow, in a very politically correct way, crept into the theories about AIDS in Africa. But the facts are that in Africa it's more women than men, sometimes by a stunningly greater factor. I quoted this paper by lead author Pettifor from South Africa, a very widespread survey of South Africa that showed that about 24% of young black women were HIV positive and about 6% of young black men. And they also had information in their survey that showed that men were, as it's no surprise, were more promiscuous than women. How can 3-4 times the number of women be HIV positive if it's the men who are more promiscuous? Why is it the black men who are being blamed when it's black women who have a higher rate of infection? You would think it'd be the other way around, but that story is not going to sell, so they revert to this old 18th century story that black men are sexually irresponsible. The facts are that in Africa, where many people are struggling to make ends meet, sex is nowhere as near as important. Sex in the hierarchy of needs. When you've got lots of money and lots of food and a nice warm place to live, then you have a lot more time for recreational sex. In places where people are extremely poor, it's not that sex is not important, but it's not elevated to the same level as in North America. Look at television, look at magazines. I mean, sex is everywhere. And how can we say that Africans are more sexually irresponsible when everybody's reading magazines and watching television programs where sex is the number one discussion topic?
So we're obsessed with sex, so when they say Africans are, we buy it a little bit easy. What are your thoughts on Tetra Silver, Mr. Crowe? Let's focus on Dr. Graves' specific claims. Has Tetra Silver cured anybody of AIDS? How do we know it is a cure for AIDS? I know it's a patented cure for AIDS according to Dr. Graves. Has it cured anybody?
Well, that's a darn good question. I don't know of any evidence, but Dr. Graves is really good about claiming he has evidence. He has evidence, supposedly, that Dr. Duesberg worked on germ warfare programs, but he's never provided that to me. I don't know how would you say that somebody was cured of AIDS. I mean, are the people that I have known for 25 years who have never gotten AIDS, even though they're HIV positive, I mean, is that not a cure? The fact that they've been prevented and cured from getting it? Are people who've had AIDS-like diseases who've then recovered, are those a cure for AIDS? Do these people become HIV negative? Where is all this evidence? You can get just about anything patented in the United States. Apparently, and I haven't verified this, but I've heard that there are a number of perpetual motion machines that have been patented by the U.S. government. If you're clever in your wording, you can get just about anything by them. Dr. Robert Gallo, for example, managed to get a blood test for HIV patented, even though a very similar blood test by Luc Montagnier of the Pasteur Institute was sitting in the patent office's files. There's political manipulation that occurs, and there is just this incredible overload of the patent officers because everybody wants to patent everything these days.
Unbelievable. Mr. Crowe, you have about 10 minutes left to take us to 1 hour. That was the estimated time for this debate. In the interest of all those interested in this debate, and there was quite a bit of a buzz earlier among the listservs that I was on, please take the last 10 minutes to outline your case and outline any other points you'd like to make about Dr. Graves, because while he's not here, his information should certainly be discussed in this hour, in fairness to the listeners who were curious to hear your position side by each.
Well, I mean, I think I've addressed his claims. He's claiming that there was a special virus cancer program. Now, I'm not so convinced that this was a germ warfare program. They may have decided that because they believed that viruses were the cause of cancer in the 60s and 70s, a theory that didn't really pan out, that maybe if they created a man-made virus, they could target tumors with this virus. So it may have had a relatively innocuous intention. The war against cancer started by Richard Nixon was obsessed with viruses. They were seen not only as the cause of cancer, but as a way to deliver, cures, to deliver targeted attacks on tumors. It was seen as a war, and the viruses were seen as a weapon against cancer. Now, did some people in the U.S. military see this as a way that they could cause cancer amongst the Russians or the Chinese or whoever their enemy was? Well, I'm sure the same people who developed cluster bombs and depleted uranium weapons probably would love to see biological weapons. Virologists, however, are the world's best scam artists. They've created a system where nobody outside the field of virology gets to criticize the virologists, and nobody within the field wants to criticize it because the money is just far too good. There seems to be an endless amount of money for studying viruses, whether it's to study the virus to try to cure diseases, to study the virus to try to create vectors for genetic therapy. Whatever it is, there's tons and tons of money, and nobody wants to rock the boat by saying, a lot of this stuff is based on pretty shallow logic, and the causal proof is not really very solid. Maybe we should start looking more at the environmental causes. I got into this whole thing because ever since I was very small, probably under 10, I was very concerned about what was happening to the world's environment. And as I began to realize that many of these supposedly viral diseases had alternative explanations that were based on exposure to pesticides, recreational drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, different things like that, I began to see the bigger picture. Viruses are getting the blame. They're very convenient whipping boys. But in many cases, it appears that there are environmental causes that are really causing the diseases, but those environmental causes have big money behind them. Mad cow disease was associated with an organophosphate pesticide program. SARS was associated with a pharmaceutical drug called ribavirin. Polio was very closely associated with pesticides used on milk products and on fruits and vegetables. But all of these potential environmental causes have been ignored. It's not a massive cover-up. It's a fact that the medical establishment sees viruses, sometimes bacteria, genes, as the cause of all disease, and they just don't look anywhere else, and they're extremely hostile to other solutions. So we have a virus cancer program, but do we have a virus? Did these people intend to create a germ warfare weapon? It's not as important as a question as did they manage to create a virus? And if HIV was that virus, how come nobody's ever been able to purify it? If we haven't purified the virus, how do we know that the antibody tests are accurate? You have to be able to purify the virus from somebody to be able to say that they have it. That's the ultimate test for a test. The way to validate an antibody test, an antigen test, DNA or RNA viral load tests, whatever the test, purification has to be used to validate it.
And Mr. Crowe, I just Googled this because I saw it earlier and found it fascinating. There's an article from Bloomberg.com which says Merck AIDS vaccine failure may doom promising study. This is update 3 by John Lauerman from March 24th, 2008. And about halfway down the article, the article reads, David Baltimore, a Nobel Prize winner and leading expert on the AIDS virus, told the American Association for the Advancement of Science meeting in Boston last month that no progress on a vaccine has been made since the disease was discovered 25 years ago. Your thoughts on AIDS in the last couple of minutes or last 5 minutes or so,
well,
Mr. Crowe?
I think it's quite instructive. I mean, if their theory is totally and utterly wrong, if it's not a viral disease, one would expect every attempt to produce a vaccine to fail. And it has. But they're not really reevaluating their entire theory. They're just saying, well, maybe we approached the vaccine wrong. And they'll probably go lick their wounds for a couple of years, and then they'll come back with more potential vaccine programs, and they will harm more people. Not by making them HIV positive, because after all, a vaccine should cause an antibody reaction, but by injecting unknown substances into their body, treating again people as guinea pigs, people who've been traumatized by being told that they're at risk for or have a fatal illness will be used as experiments, and it won't work. Some people say they would love to get a vaccine because then they could declare a cure. If the vaccine did nothing, they could say, just stop taking the drugs, you're cured. And then the whole thing would just go away. The problem is these drugs are worth billions of dollars a year. And so the drug companies really have no interest in getting rid of the golden goose.
Right, but Mr. Crowe, and in the last couple of minutes, I'm going to let you finish up. It seems to me that based on your understanding of this epidemic of AIDS, that anything would cure it as long as you're not taking toxic drugs. So they could suggest bananas, they could come out with some new sugar pill.
Well,
anything would do as long as it was something that replaced the toxic drugs.
Well, that's not quite true, because in many cases, testing positive is not a totally random thing. It indicates an overactive immune system or something like that. So it's more common amongst IV drug users. It's more common amongst malnourished Africans.
A weak immune system.
Yeah, so stopping the AIDS drugs is not going to solve the underlying problem. Now, if you combine stopping the drugs with giving the malnourished adequate and nutritious food and getting the IV drug users off the IV drugs and onto a program that will replenish the nutrients in their bodies, then you would probably have a cure for AIDS. But, I mean, many people with AIDS are genuinely sick, even before the AIDS drugs. There's an underlying reason for that, and that's what really needs to be looked at.
Well, Mr. Crowe, we're at about 58 minutes here in this debate. I'm going to ask you, thank you again for being with me. I'm checking my Gmail here, and I have not heard back from Dr. Graves, and at the phone beside me, I've not heard back from Dr. Graves. I'm going to ask you to make a sort of a 5-minute statement on what you want to see, because this is the great AIDS debate, and so I'd like to have you close it by what you would like to see from everyone out there working on the AIDS epidemic who's genuinely concerned about the people affected.
Well, I guess I would like to see a genuine debate. Not so much with Boyd Graves, but I would like to see scientists on both sides having a debate. Currently, people like Dr. Duesberg, the Perth Group, Dr. David Rasnick, all of the many scientists who question this theory are called flat earthers, Holocaust deniers. All kinds of invective is thrown at them, and nobody will say, okay, this scientist says HIV does not exist. It's never been purified. Let's talk about that. That is a really, really important issue. It's far more important than where HIV came from, because after all, if it doesn't exist, it didn't come from anywhere. It was AZT a toxic poison, or is it a life-saving drug? There are people who have claims it's a toxic poison, and it seems chemically to be sound. It does interfere with DNA synthesis. So why are we not allowed to talk about that? What's happened to science that claims that an entire area of science has gone down the wrong track for 25 years are routinely ignored. They're ignored by the media. They're ignored by government funding agencies. They're ignored by scientific journals. They're ignored by other scientists. Scientists even seem to take pleasure in denying other scientists who disagree with them access to scientific discourse. What has gone wrong with science? It's not just HIV and AIDS. Similar things happen with cancer research. Similar things are happening with global warming, where there's only one side that you're allowed to tell of the story. The same thing happened earlier in the century with the theory of continental drift. For 50 years, you weren't allowed to talk about it. When people started to talk about it, pretty soon they realized the theory was correct. Same thing happened with the Piltdown Man, a skeleton found around a skull found around 1913 that 50 years later was proved to be a fake, because a powerful scientist had found it and had declared it valid. Nobody was allowed to question it until after that scientist had died. And I'm afraid the same thing is going to happen with HIV and AIDS, that once Dr. Baltimore, Dr. Fauci, Dr. Gallo have passed on to another world, then we will be able to talk about what the real cause of all the diseases that are called AIDS are, and whether HIV actually ever existed or not.
Fantastic. Mr. Crowe, I'd like to thank you so much for your time and for joining us for the entire debate. I'd also like to thank Dr. Graves for his time and joining us for about the first third or so of this debate. Again, this was the Great AIDS Debate on April 1st, 2008. And I want to thank everybody out there so much for listening. Mr. Crowe, thanks again.
Okay, BK, it was a pleasure. And if we can do this again with Dr. Graves, I'm going to definitely give it the old college try one more time if he comes back for more.
Wonderful. We look forward to it, and I will be in touch with Dr. Graves about that. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, BK.